Susan Rogers is with us. She's a professor, a sound engineer, a record producer. And Susan, you've got a book coming out this year about music. What is called, I believe it's This Is What It Sounds Like.
Yes, that's our title.
Now, what is that book about?
Oh, I'm very excited about it. I've never written a book before, but I was invited by a co-author, and it is about the thing that I'm really good at, which is music listening. And that sounds funny, being an expert in listening to music, but that's what record producers do. That's what they do for a living. And I have my PhD in music perception and cognition, so I know something about the auditory neuroscience of listening to music. And it's also about listening to music as a non-musician. I teach at Berklee College of Music, and the kids, my students, they know about music, technically, far better and to a greater extent than I do. But as a non-musician, we non-musicians, we listen actually with kind of a different ear. So it's about that.
I remember talking with Steve Jordan one time, and I think we were talking about this song Satisfaction, and he goes, you know how the acoustic just comes in on the left side? And I'm like, no, I never once noticed that at the time. But I guess one of the things about musicians is they hear the world differently than the rest of us.
True. And that's the description there in neuroscience terms is the difference between analytic and synthetic listening. So a trained musician, especially one who's been playing music since childhood, has this, they become like auditory athletes, and they have this auditory pathway that allows them to hear subtle differences in sounds, all kinds of sounds, not just music, but also speech and environmental sounds. And musicians are quicker and better able to recognize small differences in sounds. But non-musicians have a better capacity, or at least the only capacity they have, is to listen synthetically to the global whole. So sometimes I hear things in music that my students don't hear because they're so caught up in the small little details of sound, like you just mentioned with Steve, the little details. I'm not hearing those details. They're going over my head. I'm hearing the big picture. In the book, I'm describing the thesis of the book is the listener profile, and how each and every one of us is a unique music listener. Everything is the way it is because it got that way. And our brains, over the course of our lifetimes, got to be primed to like a certain kind of music. You just like a certain groove, you like a certain lyric style, you like a certain performance gesture, you like a certain timbre, you like realistic records, or you like records that are a little bit more abstract, or you like those very, very novel records, groundbreaking records, or you like the tried and true forms. We, each of us have different sweet spots on these dimensions of music.
I also notice as I age, there's music that I wouldn't have liked when I was younger. Classical, jazz, the standards, where I enjoy it way more now than I ever thought I would.
That's a funny thing. When we're kids and young adults, fitting in to our social group is just about the most important thing, especially for teenagers. Nothing matters more to a teenager, the neuroscientists say anyway, than being part of a peer group. And what your peer group thinks of you, this has been shown in studies, what your peer group thinks of you is what you think of you. For teenagers. Wow. When we become adults, we think a little bit more for ourselves. But when we're kids, it really matters what the other folks, the other peers think. So we tend to bond to music when we're young, in part because of how it serves our social lives. Is this the group I want to be with at school, or is that the group I want to be with? Right. Your social life either rewards or punishes you for liking a certain kind of music. When we get older, we don't have to please our peer group anymore. We're more inclined to think for ourselves. And another factor is that we've heard so much music in our lives. And now, in order for us to find something novel, we're either going to listen to what's on today's pop radio, which for an older listener, that might not be all that interesting, or we're going to seek out new musical forms that we weren't into in the past, but it's brand new to us now.
I also think it's amazing that most people think the music of their high school or college is the greatest music that's ever been made, and they hold on to it kind of forever.
Yeah, that is just the sweetest thing. It's sweet because, as I was saying, when we're young, when we're teens, we don't know what to think. We don't know what to think. You have a bad day at school and you come home and you're in your room and you know, what should I have said to that teacher or to that kid? The guy that I liked just flirted with me and I didn't know how to respond, and I feel so stupid. And you put some music on and that singer tells you, here's how to handle this tomorrow. Here's what you should have said. Here's the position you should take. And that's someone taking care of you. And when we're young, we imprint on people that take care of us. So when a singer soothes that hurt and takes care of you, you got a little bit of love going for that singer, that artist. And that will sometimes just stick with you for life. You'll always have a soft spot in your heart for those artists who were there for you when you needed them.
You know, obviously, we're going to talk about your time with Prince, and it's always fascinating to me, too, when we lose an artist, whether it was John Lennon, Prince, Petty now, people then can almost get comfortable going back and try to go, what happened? You know what I mean? I kind of feel that way about Prince, of what the hell happened. It was too much to take in while it was happening.
Are you talking about his passing, or are you talking about his life?
His art, his creativity, the fact that it was so nonstop that it was almost difficult to keep up with all of it. It was almost overwhelming. Yeah,
he was the most extraordinary creative thinker and doer that I've ever known. You know, there are some folks who have extraordinary creativity, but creativity is not just measured in the number of the things you can think up in a day. Creativity is also measured in your productivity. You have to actually make something to be labeled creative. And he was a one of a kind. The fact that call him a kid, he was 24 years old when he recorded his first masterpiece, Purple Rain. Who does a masterpiece when they're 24 years old? And then 4 years later, he did another one. And let's think about the fact that not only did he write and record a masterpiece, he played nearly every instrument on it. Who can sing like that, write like that, play drums like that, play keys like that, play bass like that, play guitar like that, and run a successful business? When he was 25 years old, he had dozens of employees. Who does that? And let's add to this the fact that he had no role models. We know that the Jacksons, when they started, they had Berry Gordy and they had Diana Ross, and they had there were five brothers, and there was a whole system that brought them up through the system. Prince was a kid from North Minneapolis who achieved the same status on the pop charts in the 1980s on his own. Not without help. He had the band, he had management, but an extraordinary, one-of-a-kind accomplishment.
But no one was there to kind of be a coach with him. He kind of rejected any of that kind of stuff as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Who does that? You know, I mean, you think of, find another example. Find another example of anyone who has been that productive for that long, at that high of a level. You'd be hard-pressed to find another.
And there you are, Susan. You're right there. You're Picasso during the Blue period, and you're standing there. Why this is happening? How mind blowing was that for you?
Fortunately for me, I was young and naive. I started with him as a technician. Now, he was my favorite artist in the world. I had seen him on tour a few times in LA, and I had all his records, and I was such a Prince fan. But he hired me not as his engineer, not as his record maker. He hired me as an audio tech, because that's what he needed. So fortunately, I was naive enough on record making to not really comprehend what it was I was seeing. And I say that that's fortunate because if I had been so gobsmacked while I was there with him every day, that wouldn't have served him. He needed someone who could keep current flowing in those wires, who wasn't a fan, but who just would be his facilitator to get signal from his instruments and his voice onto tape and then back up into the speakers. That I could do for him. It wasn't until the passage of time and having to work with other artists that I recognized, like you said earlier, what was that?
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah. Susan Rogers, your career has been very, very fascinating. And also, I've never heard of anybody who's gone from producing into the academic world. How did that even pop into your mind?
Popular music is by, for, and about young people. And I reached that point in my 40s, like record makers do, when I realized I'm not interested in listening to the records I'm making right now.
Right.
I mean, you grow out of that pop stage. I was getting more into jazz, and my tastes were changing. So I started feeling like, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to go to college. I'd like to see what it's like to go to college. And I think I'd like to be a scientist. And I was right. I did like it. I did 8 straight years of college. I got a PhD, and I still love it to this day. The audio sciences are thrilling to me, and it's very creative work.
I think it's fascinating. Really, I think that your career is just ridiculously interesting because it doesn't seem to follow any kind of the normal type of ambition. You know what I mean? Like, I guess you have an ambition to answer to what your own curiosity is, rather than what people would expect a career.
That's doable. That's possible for people who are unmarried and don't have children. I'm single and I don't have kids, which means that throughout my long life, my life has been 100% my own. I can succeed or fail, and no one else is affected by the choices that I make. So because I teach college students, I'm used to having these conversations with them about what you want in this life. For many of us, what really matters is a good marriage and children, and having those children. If you want that, you should have that. But it will certainly make it more difficult to achieve other things. Those of us who say, you know what, the husband and the kids, not as big of a deal. Then we've got a clear road ahead to pursuing whatever we'd like, whenever we're fortunate enough to get to try.
And that's what made it possible for you to be available in the studio with Prince every single time he had a new idea. And what I think, I was talking about that his output of music has been tough to take it all in because it's so overwhelming. But you say that there's so many things that we haven't heard yet, finished product by Prince that went into the vault.
Yeah. He was a funny guy in the 80s. I heard a description of Jimi Hendrix on a documentary from a former girlfriend, and the girlfriend said Jimi would wake up in the morning and he'd put on his guitar and be noodling around on his guitar as he walked from the bed to the bathroom to brush his teeth. He always had that guitar in his hand, and that reminded me of Prince. If Prince was awake, if he wasn't on a date or taking a business call, he wanted to be making music. He was a musical being. And as long as he was making music, whether it was on tour or in the studio or at rehearsal, he wanted to record what he was doing. So we recorded every single day in the over 4 years when I was with him, and certainly I know he did that before I joined him and after I left. That's a lot of material. There's a lot of stuff in the vault that's, a lot of it is, I'll be frank, isn't very good. A lot of it is just redundant, where he's saying the same thing that he said on other records, but he said it better on the records that were released. So not all of it is great. But I think when the vault gets fully cataloged and disseminated, the thing that people are going to find, I think, the most exciting is the live performances.
Yeah.
Watch him live. Watch him live.
And you have video and stuff, like he was recording video and a lot of this stuff, no matter what he was up to. And it's still unseen.
A lot of it is unseen. So on tour in the 1980s, on the Purple Rain tour through Sign of the Times, the time when I was with him, again, he probably did it after I left and as well as before I got there. But he liked having a video camera running at the front of house console to capture his live shows. So when you watch him live, you get a sense of how great he was as a musician. Today, we're used to listening to records that have been pitch corrected and time corrected, so it doesn't sound like that big of a deal to hear someone play in time like that, to hear someone sing like a virtuoso, because we think, that could have been, you grab a computer mouse and that you can change that, right? That didn't actually happen. When you see those older artists perform live, that's when you recognize, no, that's how they played.
Well, that's the other thing that was kind of interesting to me about Prince too, is that when I heard him, he almost sounded like everyone that I ever liked was in a band together. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like, okay, there's Sly, there's James Brown, there's Joni Mitchell, and you just keep thinking of all these different people that you love, and somehow he was channeling a great deal of that.
Yeah, he was an avid music listener. Have you seen the television series 1971, the year that music changed everything?
Yeah.
I just finished watching that recently, and it's wonderful. And so many artists there will remind you of each other. There just weren't that many artists. You could basically know who was who in music in 50 years ago, because there weren't that many artists to know. So on, at least I remember when I was a kid, when we listened to even AM radio, you'd hear Sly Stone and you'd hear, I don't know, Bobby Sherman. You know, they were together. Music on pop radio, whereas today it's become so fractionalized that you can only really know your subgenre of music. Prince came up in that era where everything influenced you and you had access to pretty much everything.
That's a really great point, because I see stuff, I think there's some kids on TikTok, and you hear them listening to outside genres of music for the first time. And these are like hip-hop kids, but they're listening to, In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, and they're looking at each other like, wow, you know what I mean? And that is what it felt like when that whole music, when the rock and roll thing kind of went into rock in the mid to late 60s, early 70s, where people started to be able to go back and forth.
Yeah. My favorite era in music was American music in the 60s. I love the music that came out of Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and out of Stax in Memphis. And I love that it was that it wasn't divided along race lines or styles of music. It was just, let's get together and let's just play. Let's just get together and play and sing. And that's what people did. Sly Stone did that, and Prince did that as well. That it generated a voice of American music that was pretty representative, I would think, of a lot of different kinds of people.
Right.
And inevitably things are going to change, and they're gonna split off into different smaller sub branches. But that was the halcyon era to me, that era.
And it was also interesting because it was still kind of regional, where the Memphis sound was so different from the Motown sound. San Francisco had a sound. LA had a sound. London, of course, had a sound. So people were kind of doing stuff on their own and then bringing it all kind of together into the masses.
Innovations were happening, engineering innovations were happening in Philly and with Chess Records and Chicago and out in California. And then that soft rock scene came out of Los Angeles.
The canyons,
Laurel Canyon and all that. And things, inevitably that they're gonna split up. But I
also think it's interesting that, music and lyric is so important. And there's some people I talk to who are like, they never paid attention to the lyrics. Like sometimes if they get mad that somebody spoke political, I'm like, have you ever listened, to Graham Nash's music at all? He was always political.
Yeah, I write about that quite a bit in the book. So our auditory path comes up from our ears and it comes up through the auditory midbrain. And the auditory path is split between the left and right hemispheres. And the right hemisphere, in most people, right brain hemisphere, is specialized for melody and for intonation, your tone of voice, what the subtext is of what you're saying. Whereas the left side, for most people, is handling the information, the actual words. So when people say that they never listen to the words, they're being accurate. When you listen to music, you have the option of ignoring the lyrics in favor of just that tone of voice, just that performance, and not really focusing on the information. You're just focusing on the intonation. And then there are people who do the opposite. They're so fond of lyrics that they would have a hard time humming the melody. If you ask them, well, just go sing me a few bars. Well, I can't really, but it's it's the song that goes, once upon a time I was walking down the road. So there's different regions of our brain that are specialized for rhythm perception and for timbre perception and for melody and lyric perception. And then there are, of course, the aesthetic processing areas of our brain that process everything from painting to food to clothing. And all of that is getting active or not as we're listening to music, which is why every listener has a unique listener profile.
Mickey Hart was telling me before that he believes that songs are very much of their time itself too, and what the world sounds like at that time. And that's why sometimes things really change as we go through, different technologies. Right up to now, kids are learning about music on a phone. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's a completely different experience than being in the backseat of your dad's car.
Yeah, it's so personalized now.
Right.
5 people can be in a car, each one listening to different music. Remember how when we were kids, you'd have a little bit of money and you'd buy a few records, but you couldn't get everything you wanted. But your friend might have a record that you didn't have. So you could go over to your friend's house, you bring your records, and your friend has their records, maybe 2 or 3 kids get together, and you can listen to other records with your friends. Today, everybody has everything. Right. Everybody has everything. So how music functions in our life has changed drastically. Each one of us can curate a musical listening experience that's totally customized for ourselves. That's fine. That's all good. But think about all the wonderful moments you had. Remember, we've all done this. You're riding in the car and a song comes on the radio and wipes you out.
Yeah.
Wipes you out. I have, and I've had students of mine report this as well, had to pull over because you didn't trust your driving, because it knocked you out. in a self-curated playlist, that's less likely to happen, of course.
Yeah. Yes. It's almost like the fact if it's more rare, it's more precious to you. You know what I mean? Like, I just, when you said that, I thought of the first time I heard Changes by David Bowie. And I was like, what is that? I'm not here in the back cell. How am I going to find this song again? It was like seeing a pretty girl and fucking passing by you in a car or something. It was almost frightening whether I was going to get to hear that song again.
I remember this is in the early 80s. No, it would have been 1979, I think. I was on an eastbound bus in Los Angeles. I was on my way to my job, and I was sitting near the back of the bus. There was a kid holding a boombox. He was maybe 13, 14 years old. And it was the first time I ever heard Prince. The kid was listening to the radio, and Soft and Wet came on. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not getting off at my bus stop because I'm not getting off this bus until the DJ comes on and I hear who that was. That marvelous feeling of discovery. And in the book, writing about that feeling of love at first listen. It might not be a perfect record, but it's perfect for you. It's got its flaws, but for you, it just matches up with the sweet spots on your listener profile. And this record satisfies what you're looking for in music.
Susan, I love that. It's like a scene from a movie that later that's going to be the person that you dedicate years of your life to. And here's the moment, that you fall in love with that music. Do you know when the book's going to become announced, Susan?
Yeah, they're saying fall of this year. So it'll be out in the fall.
Do you have any plans to write about your experiences with Prince, or is that not there yet?
I don't think so. In the book, there are to illustrate some points, I share a few Prince stories. But after Prince passed away, myself and there were about 40 of us that we all convened. We were Prince employees, and we all convened in Minneapolis at the Lowe's Hotel across the street from First Avenue. And we kind of had a wake. Wendy Melvoin had arranged for this, and there was a microphone there and PA system. We were in the bar, 40 of us or so, 45. And we stood up one after the other, and we just took turns sharing Prince stories. It was really beautiful. And I remember thinking, that's the book I'd want to read, because all of us, each of us only saw a narrow sliver of who he was. I can talk about Prince in the studio, but what's really interesting is Prince in the studio, Prince as a friend, Prince as a band member, Prince as a boyfriend, or Prince as the whole sum of a man's life needs to be viewed from a lot of different angles. So I'd contribute to a book on his life, but I don't think I get enough interesting material for a book just from me.
When you brought up Wendy, and, I know the Revolution has gone out and done some stuff. It's amazing to me how young they were when that happened, and now how much more experience they have with those instruments. Most of those kids were playing those instruments for how long on those early records? 5-6 years or something?
Well, Wendy and Lisa's dads, both of their dads were members of the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles. So their dads were well-known studio musicians. So Wendy and Lisa knew each other since they were in diapers, and they'd been playing since they were very, very young. Wendy joined Prince. She just turned 18 years old, but she'd been playing for a long time. Lisa as well.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that connection to the Wrecking Crew. Susan Rogers, you're fascinating too, and I hope when the book comes out, you'll come back and do this again, and maybe, hopefully, we can be face-to-face here in New York or wherever you want to do it. But thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for asking me. It's a real pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate your interest in Prince and in the book as well.
All right. I'll see you soon. Take care, Susan. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.